First of all, you have had a pretty astonishing musical career. I mean, very varied and rich. How did it all start? And what sort of music did you grow up listening to in Toronto?
I had a lot of musical influences growing up, from learning folk songs at school. And my grandfather lived with us when we were young, and he was born in 1874 up in northern Ontario, and from a generation at a time when, people were all sort of at a social gathering, to give a song or a joke or whatever, be called on, to do something, and he always had all these little songs and sayings and things like that. My dad sang in church choir, and he was a very musical guy. His father actually had been a band leader up in northern Ontario in the 20s and 30s. So there was always a lot of music around. Probably the first thing that I sang a lot of was when I was about 4, 5, 6 years old, and would sing along to musicals and stuff like that. But by the time I was 13, 14 years old, both my brother and I were deeply getting into folk music, very influenced by sort of the folk revival that was going on, and the rediscovery and discovery of a lot of different kinds of traditional music and the old blues singers. So that was very formative for me, was experiencing all that as a young teenager.
So, the life of a professional musician can be a kind of precarious living.
Yes.
So what made you decide to follow that path?
Well, I actually, out of high school, I joined the musicians union at the age of 14. I was playing in public and making money playing music, but my plan was, out of high school, was to teach school and be able to play on the side and weekends and summers and stuff like that. But my teaching career lasted a brief. I taught for 4 months, and then I retired from teaching, and I've been basically making my living playing music ever since.
I see. You have performed at numerous folk festivals, and twice acted as Mariposa's artistic director.
Yeah.
What makes Mariposa special for you?
Well, there's lots of things about it. Certainly the history. Mariposa was life-changing for me as a teenager, going to those festivals in the 60s and, seeing Mississippi John Hurt meet the Reverend Gary Davis, these two legends of blues as a 13-year-old, and seeing all of these great musicians and watching, Joni Anderson transform into this songwriter, Joni Mitchell, at Mariposa's, and the whole excitement as the songwriting scene and the Canadian songwriters exploded, with all the amazing talent that we have here, and seeing the growth of all the, and being exposed to all these traditional artists, so seeing both the growth of people like myself and old-timey string bands and so on, sort of young urban people playing old styles of music, as well as being able to interact with people who originated a lot of this music. So certainly there's all of this kind of history for me, and since in its sort of current incarnation in Orillia, it's just to be going back to Orillia and seeing that site, and the site itself kind of reminds me of some of those glory days of Toronto Island, but it's really set its own path, and it's really a world-class festival in and of itself now in its current home and current incarnation, and it really, I know Mike Hill does a terrific job of really trying to make sure that the workshops are interesting and performers really get a chance to do some interacting with each other, which is part of what makes a festival special, and so I really think that it's the programming and the site and the people, the volunteers, the audience, it still is such a special place.
Yeah, I interviewed David Amram a week or so ago, and he said that the workshops at Mariposa were extremely influential on him. in his musical career, because it allowed him to interact with all sorts of musicians of different disciplines and styles. And did that have a similar effect for you?
Well, of course, and as a young performer, Estelle Klein, who was the artistic director that really developed this whole workshop idea, she really mentored me, and so I was like 22, and she said, phone up Steve Goodman and David Amram and all these people, and talk to them. Tell them you have this idea for this workshop, and figure out with them what you're going to all do, and so on. So that kind of opportunity to not only have those interactions on stage, but Estelle really encouraged that kind of contact prior to the festival, where she knew that people were excited, or even if people didn't know, didn't actually phone each other up, seeing the great Cajun accordion player Marc Savoie is so excited to be up here and to be meeting Philippe Bruneau, the great Quebecois accordion player, and then the unexpected things, and putting people who didn't know each other, putting a David Amram with Malvina Reynolds, this great sage of songwriting, and Steve Goodman, the sort of, at the time, kind of the exemplar of contemporary, great contemporary songwriters, and throwing them all together on a stage and seeing what you get, and it, having the confidence to do that, and having talked to them all ahead of time so that they hit that stage with a sense of preparation. And so that really has had a profound effect on me in lots of ways. And for example, for the last 14 years, I've run a series at Hughes Room in Toronto through the winter of Sunday gospel shows, and they're really modeled on a Sunday morning folk festival gospel workshop.
Okay.
With that idea of all the performers on stage and having a chance to interact. And that grew out of having the opportunity to do that at Mariposa and then subsequently at other festivals. You've
written a lot of children's material and worked with Raffi.
Talked to Raffi this morning, as a matter of fact.
Well, how about that?
I was working with Fred Penner yesterday. So
well, there we go. Did the children's material, did this stem from your early experiences performing in Toronto schools in the early 70s? Yes,
well, Mariposa in the schools, which initially was an outgrowth of the festival, was very influential. I mentioned that I had a very brief teaching career, and for me it was a revelation to go in as a musician rather than as a teacher, and it was very liberating to just sort of be able to be myself and share what I knew with kids, and share all these different kinds of music that I'd been turned on to, and try and communicate to kids that music was a vehicle for expressing this range of emotions and ideas, and that you didn't need to just be an observer, as a consumer of music, but could be a participant in making it. So that was always part of my impetus and the work I did with my brother. So we were doing jug band programs through Mariposa in the schools for years, and then recorded our own junior jug band records, and this in turn got his kids, Jenny Whiteley and Daniel Whiteley, into music as well. So,
what are your plans now for the immediate future?
Well, this month in April, I'm doing a few gigs with the Beulah Band. I just have released a brand new CD called Freedom Blues that's kind of explores the idea of freedom from both the internal mental state of freedom and also the social, the broader context in which freedom can flourish, or perhaps in which our freedoms maybe are being impeded. So that's a new work that I'm just trying to get that out there as well. And I just was up in Northern Ontario, in the studio producing a few artists. Going to be working with Fred Penner. I'm working with a bluesy songwriter by the name of Kim Doolittle, who's from Nova Scotia, and lots more things sort of in the planning stages.
They just mentioned the Beulah Band. I was kind of wondering how the Beulah Band got its name.
Well, the Beulah Band got its origin really with the idea of I wanted to do a folkier kind of project, and I got together, with banjo and fiddle, Rosalind Dennett on the fiddle, and then we also started singing together, and that really cemented things, and it really began to feel like a band. So one of the first songs that we sang was an old version from the Georgia Sea Islands of a song called Beulah Land. And Beulah Land is a reference from the book of Isaiah, returning home from the Babylonian exile. And so it really represents a certain kind of homecoming. It's often used as a euphemism for heaven, but, more broadly, and in fact, in its original form, it was returning home. So I see this as a certain kind of homecoming.
Now, here's a question I've been asking people. If you could put together a band made up of any musicians in the world, living or dead, which musicians would you choose for your band?
How many pieces? How many people
you can decide how many, as long as it's not sort of 85.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think if that was the option, it would be fun to get a horn section. I think of maybe Louis Armstrong or Clifford Brown on trumpet, and Coleman Hawkins, Lester Young. But there's some great younger musicians, or younger people, younger than me anyway. I just did a performance with Richard Underhill and Perry White from the Shuffle Demons, and a young trumpet player named Ewan Divot, who plays with a woman named Joanna Chapman Smith, and they were a fabulous horn section too. So it's kind of hard for me to do these imaginary leaps into who I would get. Like, I've played with different festivals over the years. I've had a chance to see Stefan Grappelli and Joe Venuti even, and yet I would say John Showman is a great fiddler by any stretch of the imagination. I love Rosalind Dennett's playing. There was a great fiddler named Stuff Smith, who doesn't maybe get quite doesn't have the same broad name recognition these days that Grappelli might, but he was another great fiddler who really put that great old feeling into his fiddling. And I think of all the singers, I would want to get Claude Jeter who is the high tenor singer from part Cherokee who was in the Swan Silvertones, and Jimmy Johnson, who was the bass singer for the Harmonizing Four. I'm thinking about this ultimate gospel quartet. Do you think we could have Joe Lagon as well, who was the lead singer for the Mighty Clouds of Joy, and then maybe just to sort of put a few edges on it, we'd get Bessie Jones from the Georgia Sea Islands in there as well, and so that would be a great vocal contingent. And then I think maybe get Big Sid Catlett on the drum. Who would we get as the bass player? Well, I don't know. There's some pretty good bass players around these days who straddle, both, like I think of someone like George Kohler, who's played with me before, who and he's been a mentor to people like my son Ben, who straddles both the roots music world, and he knows the value of time and place to just be playing the boom, boom, boom,
right,
and putting the feel into that, but then he can also go off in incredible flights of imagination and improvisational glories, and play with the best jazz musicians or Latin musicians. And I think David Amram really captured something special in the 70s when he brought his experience in classical music and jazz, and he really encouraged all of us who were at the time younger musicians in our 20s to sort of see music as something that shouldn't really have walls. And so that's really been something that I have tried to live myself in the intervening 40 years, is to not kind of create walls between different styles of music. And so that's why it's fun now to play with younger musicians who have maybe influences by people that I don't even know